My name is Dustin John Willett. I was born Dustin John Willard. My biological father struggled with a drug and alcohol addiction, and he was in and out of jail his entire life. At this point in time, I was a very hurt kid, looking for a lot of acceptance, trying to find my identity. I had an emptiness inside of me. I had a void that, I'd always been trying to fill. I felt like nobody cared about me, especially when it came to my father. And all the unanswered questions I had on why he wasn't in my life, or why he left me, or why he did the things he did. Drugs, they made me not think about that stuff. I didn't have to be me. It's kind of like the ironic thing about me being adopted. I was able to not be Dustin Willard and continue to form myself into this false person that I wanted to be. The misery that I had been feeling for so long was able to leave me. Now it would come back, and that's where my problem got worse, is because I didn't want it to come back, because I was able to escape reality through drugs. So, I continued to dive deeper into my drug addiction.
I really can't put a finger on when it started. I started seeing signs. He was rebelling at home, fighting with everybody, when it just got deeper and deeper as his addiction went on. And I can't even count how many nights that I sat waiting to get a phone call. That my son was dead. Just sitting up and waiting for that phone call. And not having him be a part of our lives. That's the hardest thing, I think. And that you don't have any control over it.
So there was a girl in my life that I love dearly. Her name is Danielle Davis. I met her at a party that I was having at my house one night. I laid my eyes on her, and I thought she was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen. And throughout that night, me trying to get up the confidence to figure out that line, to go say to her, to figure out how I was gonna, get her into liking a guy like me. And, finally got up enough courage to actually walk over to her and start talking. She was a girl that, had a personality like no other. She was definitely a person that, you wanted to be around. So instantly I was drawn to her. I think that was maybe the first time I was able to actually experience what love meant. She always had a smile on her face. And she always knew how to make me feel good about me. I didn't have to be anybody for her. Being so passionate and so okay with where I was at in every moment when I was with her. I try to sit here and think of this specific thing that she loved about me, but I think that was what was awesome about her, is she just loved me for me. And every time I used to tell her I love her, I would always say that I loved her more. I'd write it out and I'd spell it wrong. I'd spell it M-O-O-R-E. That was just me showing, I loved her more, because I could add an extra O to it.
There was a point in Dustin's whole addiction over the years that he seemed to get to a happy place. It's when Danielle came into his life. He even came to me and talked to me about a ring that I had. He had real strong feelings for her, and he was in love with her, and that he wanted their lives to carry on, forever.
Basically, I was ready to take that next step, and we started talking about getting married. And, my mom let me have this ring. It was a past, present, and future ring. And Danielle was sitting in the living room. Didn't make it a big deal. I was nervous. I didn't really know, what to do anyways. And I just sit down on the couch with her and, nonchalantly grab her hand and put this ring on her finger, and I just kind of look at her will you marry me, without saying it, but still it being known that that's what was going on. And her eyes lit up and she started smiling so we could, start our life together. We were pretty much together every single day from that point on.
I met Dustin on Danielle's birthday. They were just really sweet and in love, and I remember thinking to myself that they, as a couple, were destined to be together, and I think that's what made them or drew them together to begin with.
And I remember her getting up, that Monday morning, and I remember her getting in the car and leaving, and, me holding her and telling her I loved her and goodbye, and she left to go to school, and I started to get up and get ready for work. And then, Danielle calls me later that night. I remember her getting a knock at the door, and it was, someone that she knew. She goes to open it, and she's like, I'll call you right back. The last thing I said before we ended that phone call was, I love you and goodbye. And, she told me the same. She told me she loved me too, and she told me goodbye. Sometimes I wonder if I could go back and change that, because if I only knew what was standing on the other side of that door.
I didn't know any of this was going on. When I noticed that everybody was there except Danielle, I said, where's Danielle? What's wrong? And she told me, that somebody had murdered her, and the first thing I thought of was, she didn't have any enemies. She was a beautiful girl. Who would want to do this to her?
There was a 17-year-old kid named Daryl that beat and strangled Danielle. When I found that out, I had so much rage and anger built up inside of me that, I basically wanted to do to that kid what he did to her. So I'll be honest, thoughts like that went through my mind. I was so upset to have the love of my life taken from me, to be robbed of something that we had with each other. Especially with the past that I had with losing my father, losing things here and there, and then sure enough, I find something that makes me happy and I love more than anything, and it's taken from me. She kept Danielle's room just like it was, wouldn't mess with it. The dirty clothes that were in the hamper to, the perfume and the glasses that were sitting on her dresser. I remember her mom would let me go up there by myself, and I'd literally just try to pretend that, Danielle was still there with me. I remember smelling her clothes and stuff, just trying to get that scent, that thing that said, this is Danielle's, this was hers. It allowed me to hold on to something that wasn't there anymore.
This is when I saw the most dramatic change in Dustin. He sunk into a deep hole, and I didn't know how to help him. Nobody knew how to help him. How do you tell somebody that everything's going to be okay after the love of your life gets taken from you in such a horrific way? But that's when it got the roughest, is after Danielle passed away.
It almost confirmed the beliefs that I had about God and the way I felt like He didn't care about me. So I started using heavier than I ever had in my entire life. Hated myself, hated everybody. And, my life just literally completely spiraled out of control after all this. And I remember I had a pistol, and I remember it being loaded sitting in my lap, just thinking I should put this to my head and pull the trigger. And, it was right about that time when I was at my absolute bottom that I found no longer bound. The first few months, it was tough for me. It was really hard. And, I finally started buying into what No Longer Bound had to offer. It's sometimes I feel like I'd be sitting in a field at a desk all alone, writing some of my deepest, darkest things that I never thought I would share. Tearing through the pages of my life, I had to actually stop and deal with things that I had never wanted to deal with, never wanted to face. Sometimes it was so hard to face them, I'd rather just crumble the paper and throw it. But there's one thing I had to do on my own, and that was face myself and my past. Uncovering the truth, facing my fears, realizing reality. Step away from these strongholds, and I allowed God to show me that there was something different, something better, and I did deserve better.
The one thing that I didn't think I would ever see was my son telling me about what God's doing for him. It was amazing to watch him grow, and myself grow, and my husband grow, and just our whole family in general grow over what No Longer Bound is doing.
I stood in front of the mirror. I tried to stand there as long as I could and actually look at myself. I wanted to turn away. I was looking at a monster, I felt, and I went back to that mirror. And for the first time, I was actually able to look at myself and actually see some hope and some peace in my eyes. I knew that I needed to forgive. Every debt I felt I was owed, every entitlement I had from God, from myself, from my biological father. I took all that and I put it on paper. I'm not holding anything against him. In the forgiveness, there's one person that I left out. His name's Daryl. He's the person who murdered Danielle.
I know that he deserves forgiveness from me and from everybody.
I think if we just were as forgiving as Jesus was, the world would be a better place.
And I know coming into this, I had so much anger, frustration. I hated him. Felt like he didn't deserve anything from me. He owed me so much because he took something from me, something that I love so dearly. But I did. I gave that up. The right to get even with him, the right to wish horrible things against him. I looked at Jesus as my example. And I forgave Daryl from the bottom of my heart. I took it and I nailed it to a cross. And I gave it to Jesus. And to walk away from that, oh man, it was like I had a literal ton weight lifted from my shoulders. I was just free. And all of that and the forgiveness, that was one of the hardest things that I've ever done in my entire life. But unfortunately, it wasn't the hardest. I knew I had never truly grieved the loss of her. So I was at the graveyard and I wrote a goodbye letter to her. They sat around me and, I pulled that letter out, and it's crazy to say, but I read that letter to Danielle. I wanted her to know I was sorry, how I felt, how much I loved her. And I remember sitting there and I remember, just reading that letter, pouring my heart out. It's hard to describe, but I know how real it was.
One of the most powerful things that Dustin has ever told me about, he said he was taken to a cemetery and that he knew he had to let her go. And he told me that she came to him and he said that the world went away and it was just her and him, and that he gets to close a chapter of his life that was really hard so he can move on.
I remember, closing my eyes and being able to see Danielle. The one thing she said is that she was okay and she was happy where she was. The only thing she wants for me is to be happy. And I remember asking her in this moment if I could hold her one last time. And I did. I was able to hold her. She was in my arms and I held her. I held on to her as tight as I could. To be honest, I never wanted to let go. It was so real. It was like I knew it was time. And I told her goodbye. And I walked into that graveyard, and I took my letter and I folded it up, and I buried it, and I left all that there. And the freedom that came about me that day when I was leaving that graveyard was something that is so hard to describe. Flying away, that's kind of how I felt. Like I was just flying away from things, and it was because of Jesus, and it was because I was actually experiencing life and feelings rather than running from them. I'm Dustin Willett, and I am no longer bound.